The mall in Rancho Cucamonga was bustling with the pre-Christmas rush. I squeezed between carts and families with children, holding a list of gifts written in illegible handwriting. December 23rd was always the day of last-minute shopping, a habit I'd never gotten rid of in 72 years of life. Margarita laughed about it, called me a procrastinator, but she secretly enjoyed our December shopping trips. We used to turn gift shopping into a kind of adventure, stopping at cafes, discussing options, arguing about what was best to choose. Now I was doing it alone, and the process had become a dull chore. For Travis, I was choosing a book about programming. My son had been a developer for 15 years now, but for some reason I still thought I could find something useful for his career. I guess it was an attempt to maintain a connection that was becoming more elusive with each passing year. Since he'd married Kimberly 4 years ago, our relationship had become a polite exchange of phrases about the weather and work. I remembered as a kid, Travis would sit in my newsroom for hours while I finished articles. He drew on the back of drafts, built towers out of old newspapers, and sometimes fell asleep on the couch in the corner. Colleagues got used to his presence, some bringing him candy or showing him pictures that were going to make it into the issue. Travis asked endless questions. Why people read the news, how the printing press works, why journalists need to fact-check. Because the truth comes first, I told him. If we don't tell the truth, who will? He nodded seriously, as if he understood the importance of these words. Later he chose a different profession, but I always hoped that those lessons stayed with him, that somewhere inside he was still that boy who believed in the importance of honesty and fairness. Kimberly had a harder time choosing a gift. She loved expensive things and often hinted at her refined taste. Yet every choice I made was invariably not quite what she expected. Last year I bought her a silk scarf and she said she preferred cashmere. The year before that, a perfume that she said didn't suit her skin type. The first year I met her, I gave her a book, a collection of O. Henry short stories that Margaret loved. Kimberly thanked me with an icy smile and later mentioned in front of Travis that she didn't understand why she would give books to people who had audiobooks and streaming services. I stopped by the jewelry store window and eyed the silver bracelets, trying to imagine which one wouldn't cause her to get that particular look on her face, a mixture of disappointment and condescension. "Are you looking for something special?" the saleswoman asked with a strained smile. "For my sister-in-law," I answered. "She's demanding." The saleswoman nodded understandingly, as if she had dealt with such cases. Working in the jewelry department of the mall before Christmas, she'd probably met a lot of confused men trying to please difficult women. "Perhaps something neutral. Classic?" she suggested, pulling out a tray of jewelry. I chose a thin chain with a small pendant, expensive enough that Kimberly wouldn't think me stingy, but simple enough to avoid criticism, though she'd find a reason to criticize me anyway. She had a special talent for turning any gesture of goodwill into an occasion for displeasure. I remember Marguerite warning me of this before we were married. My wife had an amazing ability to read people, the professional deformity of a school psychologist, as she said herself. 30 years of working with teenagers had taught her to recognize manipulation, covert aggression, and attempts at control. After meeting Kimberly for the first time, Marguerite cautiously notes that the girl seems too focused on outward displays of success. She looks at Travis not as a man, but as a project, Margarita said then, pouring tea for us in the kitchen. "See how she corrects his speech? The way she corrects his shirt? It's not love, Len. It's a desire to create the perfect picture." Marguerite never said anything mean about people without good reason. She was the kind of person who always tried to find the good in everyone, who gave people the presumption of innocence. But in Kimberly's case, her professional instincts took over. "Look at the way she acts with the waiters," she continued after that dinner at the restaurant where we first met her future daughter-in-law. "She's not overtly rude, but there's something dismissive. It's like she thinks she's above them. And when Travis made a joke about his job, she didn't laugh. She looked embarrassed, like he'd said something inappropriate. But Travis was in love. At 35, he'd first met a woman who paid attention to him, and he'd been willing to do anything not to lose her. Kimberly was beautiful, a slender blonde with impeccable makeup and manicures who could present herself in a way that would make men look back. My son, who had spent his whole life in front of a computer, was dazzled by the attention. He told me about her as if he couldn't believe his own good fortune. Kimberly worked as a manager for a cosmetics company, traveled frequently, knew where the best restaurants were, and what wines to order. This was a revelation to Travis, who had been eating pizza and Chinese takeout before he met her. He started going to the gym, upgraded his closet, even enrolled in an etiquette class, all to become worthy of her attention. For the first few months of their relationship, I still hoped I was wrong. Kimberly was polite, smiling, interested in my health. But Marguerite saw things that eluded me. The way she wrinkles her nose when I tell stories from my journalism internship. The way she rolls her eyes when Travis laughs at my jokes. The way she discreetly nudges him toward decisions that gradually distance my son from me. She wants to remake him, Marguerite said. And you are a reminder of what he was like before she met him. She won't forgive you for that. The words were prophetic. Gradually, our family traditions began to fade away. Fishing weekends became a childhood hobby that a grown man should give up. Our pizza dinners, where we discussed movies and books, became an unproductive waste of time. Even my stories about working at the newspaper have become boring stories about the last century. Travis should be looking to the future, not living in memories, Kimberly said at dinner one night when I was talking about how I'd covered the mayoral election in '89. Travis nodded in agreement, and I realized I'd lost him for good. Marguerite had died 2 years ago, and with her death, the last barrier between me and Kimberly's growing hostility disappeared. My wife had a knack for smoothing over sharp edges, for finding compromises, for turning family dinners into warm gatherings rather than battlefields. She never openly criticized Kimberly, but she was adept at steering the conversation in a safe direction when things got heated. In front of her, Kimberly held back, perhaps out of respect for Margaret's age and wisdom, or perhaps simply not wanting to look bad in her mother-in-law's eyes. I remember that last Christmas dinner when Marguerite was still with us. Kimberly brought out a salad and started explaining to everyone what expensive ingredients she used, how much time she spent searching for the right olive oil. Marguerite listened to her with a smile and then said, "How wonderful that you care so much about quality. It's true that the most important thing about food is not the price of the ingredients, but the love with which you cook. I think that's why my mom's cutlets were always the most delicious, even though the meat was bought at the regular store." Kimberly didn't have anything to say, but I could tell by the look on her face that the lesson was getting through. Now I was alone with my sister-in-law, who no longer felt the need to hide her attitude toward me. She called it honesty, but I called it cruelty. Kimberly had a special gift for finding pain points and hitting them. She knew I missed working at the newspaper and regularly insinuated that modern journalism had long since changed, and my skills were hopelessly outdated. She knew I was taking Margarita's death hard, and sometimes dropped phrases about the importance of not dwelling on the past and moving on. "Len, you need to find a hobby," she said at a past family dinner. "Maybe join a retirement club? There are probably people there your age with similar interests. The modern world needs modern solutions, not nostalgia for the days when news was printed on paper." Travis nodded in agreement, and I realized that they had been discussing me at home, planning this conversation, deciding how best to get the old man to understand that he was no longer needed. But what hurt me the most was the effect it was having on Travis. My son was slowly turning into someone I didn't recognize. He stopped calling just to see how he was doing. His visits became formal, on holidays and birthdays, and then reluctantly. When we were alone together, he was tense, as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing that might be used against him. Our conversations turned into an exchange of platitudes, and sincerity disappeared completely. I often wondered what Travis would tell his kids about Grandpa, if he ever had them. Would he tell them how we fished on Big Bear Lake when he was 10? How I taught him how to drive in an empty parking lot outside the mall? How we built a model airplane together and he sat on it all night until it was finished? Or will those memories fade away too, dissolve into a new reality where the past is something to be discarded? The last time we'd had a heart-to-heart was 2 years ago, right after Marguerite's funeral. Travis had come to help me sort through her things, and we'd spent hours in silent labor, boxing up dresses, books, jewelry. When we got to her magazines, Marguerite was collecting clippings from educational publications, Travis suddenly sat on the floor and cried. "She was so smart, Daddy," he said through his tears. Remember how she used to help me with my homework? She never gave me ready answers, always made me think for myself. And when I came home from school upset, she knew how to find the right words. I sat down next to him and hugged him like I used to when he was a kid, when he was scared or hurt. She was proud of you, I said. Always said you grew up to be a good man. We sat like that for half an hour, and I thought that maybe my mother's death would bring us back to intimacy, help us remember how we used to be. But a week later, Travis was back to his old self, aloof, cautious, as if afraid to show weakness. As I paid for the gifts, I thought about dinner tomorrow night. Kimberly had invited us to her place for Christmas, or rather, she'd invited Travis, and she'd included me as an unavoidable addition. She had been cooking for days, regularly posting pictures of the process on social media. She was especially proud of the turkey. She had found some special recipe and bought the bird at the farmer's market for an astronomical amount of money. You know, Len, Travis told me over the phone, she ordered this turkey back in October. She says it's going to be the best Christmas dinner she's ever had. She even hired a photographer to capture everything beautifully for her blog. He could hear the pride in his voice, but also the anxiety. He understood the expectations surrounding this dinner, the pressure his wife was feeling, and I understood that any inaccuracy, any little thing that could ruin her perfect picture, would be met with fury. Kimberly had turned her life into a never-ending social media show. Every dinner, every walk, every purchase became an excuse for beautiful photos and bragging posts. She carefully controlled the image of the perfect couple she was creating with Travis, and any deviation from the script was seen as a personal disaster. I got in the car and put the gift bags in the back seat. It was starting to get dark outside the window, the mall lights creating a warm yellow glow. Families with children hurried to their cars, laden with shopping and holiday anticipation. Young couples hugged while planning the evening. Older spouses discussed tomorrow's to-do lists. All these people were rushing home, where they were waiting for loved ones, warmth, and a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves. I started the engine and slowly pulled onto the road that led home, to an empty house, where silence and memories of Christmas evenings that would never be repeated awaited me. An old Frank Sinatra song was playing on the radio, and I thought about sitting at the table at the same time tomorrow, surrounded by people who think I'm a burden. But the gifts are already bought, the plans are made, and there's no backing out. Travis and Kimberly's house in the upscale Rancho Cucamonga neighborhood looked like the cover of a country life magazine. I parked in the neatly mowed lawn and sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my wits. The snow-white columns, the perfectly symmetrical flower beds, the wreath on the door made of real spruce branches. Everything looked flawless and cool, like an advertising picture of a happy family life. As I approached the front door, I heard the sounds of music and laughter from inside. Kimberly opened the door wearing an elegant red dress that, judging by the cut and quality of the fabric, cost more than my monthly pension. Her shiny hair was in a flawless updo, and her makeup looked like she was getting ready for a photo shoot for a glossy magazine. "Len!" she exclaimed with a wide smile that didn't touch her eyes. "How glad we are to see you. Come in, come in, take off your coats. Travis, your father is here." She kissed me on the cheek, a formal gesture that looked caring to outside observers, but felt like a fulfillment of duty. The house smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, jazz music played, and candles and expensive candlesticks flickered everywhere. Kimberly had clearly spent a lot of time creating an air of sophistication. "Dad!" Travis appeared from the living room with a glass of wine in his hand. He hugged me, and I could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, the same cologne I'd used in college. "How was your drive? Was there any traffic?" "It was fine," I said, handing him the bag of gifts. "How are you doing? You look tired." "No, I'm fine," he said quickly, glancing at Kimberly. "It's just a lot of work before the holidays. You know how it is. Come on, I'll introduce you to our friends." There were 8 people in the living room, couples about Travis and Kimberly's age, all dressed as if they were attending a social gathering, not a family dinner. The men in expensive shirts and jackets, the women in cocktail dresses and jewelry that shimmered in the chandelier light. Conversations were conducted in a low voice, everyone held with that special ease that gives away people who are accustomed to comfort and prosperity. "Friends, I'd like you to meet Leonard, Travis's father." Kimberly announced, taking my hand with theatrical tenderness. Len, this is Madison and Connor. They work with me at the company. And Riley and Jaden we met at the health club. And Haley and Austin are neighbors. They have the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood. Everyone smiled and nodded, saying the standard phrases about how nice it was to meet you. Madison, a skinny brunette with sharp features, immediately started asking me about my profession. Travis told me you were a journalist, she said with an enthusiasm that seemed a little too fake to me. How interesting. You must have a lot of fascinating stories. I used to work for the local newspaper, I answered. Mostly city news, nothing particularly exciting. But still, Madison continued, it's so important to keep the traditional press alive these days. Although, of course, digital media has completely changed the industry. Do you follow the new trends in journalism? I realized she was trying to be polite, but her question sounded like a barely veiled hint that my knowledge was hopelessly outdated. Kimberly stood nearby with a satisfied smile watching this conversation. I try to keep up, I replied diplomatically, although I admit that my younger colleagues are much better at social media and mobile applications. Oh yes, Connor, a large man with carefully styled hair said. My daughter is 16 and she gets all her news from TikTok. Can you believe it? I sometimes think print media will disappear altogether in a couple years. That would be a shame, I said. There's something special about print journalism, the opportunity to study a subject thoughtfully, to check the facts, to write an in-depth story. Sure, agreed Haley, a middle-aged blonde with perfect teeth. But today's people want information fast. Who has time to read long articles? The conversation unfolded exactly as I'd expected. These men were not mean or deliberately rude, but in their politeness there was a sense of condescension toward a member of a bygone era. They spoke to me the way one speaks to an elderly relative, whose looks seemed sweet but hopelessly old-fashioned. Travis would periodically approach our group, trying to keep the conversation going or shift attention to other topics. But it was obvious he was nervous. Every time I said something, he would watch the reactions of those present, as if he was afraid I would say something inappropriate. Dad, maybe you want to see the house, he suggested during a brief pause in the conversation. We recently did some remodeling in the kitchen. Kimberly immediately perked up and took the initiative. Yes, Len should see everything, she exclaimed. We spent a lot of time planning the layout, picking out every detail. Come on, I'll show you the kitchen. We moved into the kitchen, which looked like the set of a cooking show. Marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, an island in the middle with bar stools, a modern hood that probably cost as much as a nice car. Everything was shiny and sparkling, not a single thing lying out of place. See that stove? Kimberly pointed to a massive 6-burner stove. Professional, the kind they use in restaurants. And the refrigerator is French, with separate temperature zones for different foods. And look at that coffee machine. It makes a better cappuccino than any coffee shop. She took us around the kitchen like a tour guide in a museum, telling us about every appliance, every detail of the interior. The guests listened with rapt attention, praising her taste and the sense of style. Travis stood nearby and nodded when Kimberly mentioned his involvement in choosing this or that item. And now for the main event, Kimberly announced triumphantly. My Christmas turkey. She opened the oven and fragrant steam poured out. The turkey did indeed look impressive. Golden brown, perfectly baked, garnished with herbs and slices of lemon. Kimberly took out a tray with special oven mitts and set it on the island for everyone to admire her creation. Oh my God, Kim, Riley exclaimed. It's absolutely gorgeous. Where did you get this recipe? It's my grandmother's secret family recipe, Kimberly said proudly. She only passed it down to me out of all her granddaughters. The turkey must be marinated for 2 days in a special blend of spices and then baked at a strictly defined temperature. The slightest deviation and all that labor is for naught. How much does it weigh? Austin asked, taking a picture of the bird with his phone. 12 pounds, Kimberly replied. I ordered it from a farm in Temecula back in October. Organic, free-range, no antibiotics or hormones. It cost $300, but the results are worth it. Everyone gasped in admiration at the magnitude of it. Kimberly glowed with pleasure, accepting compliments and sharing details of the preparation. She posted the cooking process on social media, showed photos of each step, and read comments from followers. "Look, I already have 300 likes under the last post," she said, showing her phone screen. "And so many questions about the recipe. Maybe I should write a cookbook." "You should," Madison seconded. "You have such a talent for cooking and such artistic taste. Your food photos always look professional." I stood back and watched this spectacle, feeling invisible. Kimberly was in her element, surrounded by admiring onlookers, showing off her accomplishments, receiving recognition and praise. Every gesture was rehearsed, every phrase selected for maximum effect. This was no ordinary family dinner. This was a show called Kimberly's Perfect Life. Travis, too, played his part in this performance. He admired his wife, complimented her stories, delivered the right lines. When someone praised the turkey, he nodded and said Kimberly had cooked it 3 days in a row. When the kitchen was admired, he'd tell her how long it took them to choose the materials and appliances. He was the perfect husband in a perfect picture, but he looked tense, as if he was afraid of making a mistake and ruining the carefully constructed image. "Well, friends, maybe it's time to get to the table," Kimberly suggested, glancing at her watch. "The turkey should cool down a bit, but in the meantime, we could enjoy our appetizers." We moved into the dining room, where a table for 10 was set. White tablecloths, silverware, crystal glasses, candles and tall candlesticks. Everything looked solemn and expensive. In the center of the table was an arrangement of red roses and spruce branches, obviously ordered from a professional florist. Kimberly seated the guests with the care of a stage manager watching the mise-en-scene. She seated me at the far end of the table, between Haley and Austin, far enough away from the center of attention, but within the bounds of propriety. Travis sat next to her, to the right of the main seat, which was taken by the lady of the house. "So," Kimberly said, raising her champagne glass, "I want to thank everyone for coming to share this special evening with us. Christmas is a time for family and friends, a time to share joy and create memories. May this dinner be the start of a wonderful new year for all of us." Everyone raised their glasses and said the traditional cheers. Kimberly glowed with pleasure as she accepted congratulations on organizing the evening. The guests praised her for her hospitality, her taste, her ability to create a festive atmosphere. The appetizers began, exquisite canapes, cheeses that Kimberly had specially ordered from the delicatessen department of an expensive supermarket, red caviar on toast. Everything was beautifully served on porcelain plates, decorated with greenery and edible flowers. Conversations flowed easily. The guests discussed plans for the holidays, the latest news from the world of entertainment, work, travel. I ate in silence, occasionally answering my table mates' questions, and thought about how things had changed in 4 years. Our family dinners used to be in the kitchen at a simple table, talking about everything, laughing, arguing, sharing news. Margarita cooked simple but delicious food, and the main dish of the evening was not culinary masterpieces, but lively communication and sincerity. Now I sat among strangers who feigned interest in me out of politeness, watched my son, who played the role of a happy husband, and listened to my daughter-in-law, who turned the family party into a presentation of her own success. By the time Kimberly ceremoniously brought the turkey into the dining room, the atmosphere at the table had become less casual. The alcohol had loosened tongues, and the conversations had become more personal, more frank. Connor talked about his promotion at work. Madison complained about the difficulty of finding a good nanny. Riley and Jaden discussed plans to buy a new house in a more upscale neighborhood. I listened to these conversations with a growing sense of alienation. These people lived in a world where success was measured by paychecks, car brands, and square footage of real estate. Their problems seemed far-fetched to me, their accomplishments empty. But what frustrated me the most was that Travis was enthusiastically participating in these conversations, talking about a new project at work, about plans to buy a more expensive car, about how Kimberly wanted to remodel the guest bedroom. "How do you spend your time in retirement, Len?" Haley asked, turning to me with a polite smile. "I guess you can finally take up a hobby." "I read a lot," I answered. "I go to the library and sometimes I write notes for the local weekly." "Nothing much." "That's nice," Kimberly exclaimed a little louder than necessary, drawing the attention of the whole table. Len still clung to journalism, But now it's more of a retirement hobby than a real job. There was something prickly in her tone that made several of the guests glance over. Travis glanced quickly at me, then at his wife, clearly sensing the tension building. "By the way, Dad just wrote an interesting article about the new library," he said, trying to smooth over the awkwardness. "It's very thorough." "Oh, yes," Kimberly said with the same unnatural brightness in her voice. "Len's a big expert on libraries, and everything else too. He always has an opinion on everything, based on his experience from the time of the dinosaurs." Madison laughed nervously, not knowing how to respond to the obvious barb. Austin stared at his phone, pretending to read something important. Jaden began to eat vigorously, avoiding eye contact. "Kim," Travis said quietly. Maybe what?" Kimberly interrupted him. "I'm just stating the facts. Your father used to think he was an expert on everything, even though the world had changed a long time ago. Modern journalism is not what he did 30 years ago." I felt a familiar wave of irritation rising, but I forced myself to keep quiet. This was not the time or place for conflict. But Kimberly apparently decided the evening wasn't interesting enough without a little drama. "You, Connor, work in IT," she continued, turning to one of the guests. "Tell me honestly, would you take seriously the advice of a programmer who last updated his knowledge in the 80s? Connor clearly didn't want to get into this conversation. "Well," he said uncertainly, "experience is always valuable, of course." "Exactly," Kimberly exclaimed. "Experience is valuable when it's relevant. And when a man clings to the past and refuses to recognize reality, it's not experience, it's stubbornness." Haley began busily slicing the meat on her plate, making more noise than necessary. Riley was suddenly interested in the arrangement on the table, beginning to ask in detail where Kimberly had ordered the flowers. The attempts to divert attention were obvious and desperate. "Speaking of the past," Kimberly said, not about to back down. "Len, do you remember last Christmas when you told us that endless story about some mayor from the 80s? Everyone was already asleep, and you just kept going on and on." "Kimberly," Travis said firmly, "that's enough." "Enough of what?" She turned to her husband with an innocent look on her face. "Did I say something wrong? I mean, we all remember that night. Even your mom started yawning, even though she was always so polite. The mention of Marguerite sounded like a slap in the face. I felt my fist clench under the table. Kimberly knew what she was doing. She was purposefully looking for pain points and pressing them. "My mom was never rude to guests," I said calmly, "unlike some hostesses." There was silence. The guests froze with forks in their hands, not knowing where to look. Kimberly turned pale, then slowly blushed. "Excuse me," she said icily. "What did you say?" "You heard perfectly well," I replied. "Marguerite had a way of making people feel welcome, not a burden." "Dad," Travis said warningly, "please." "No." Kimberly stood up from the table, her voice shaking with rage. "Let him finish. Let him say what he thinks of my hospitality. I spent 3 days preparing this dinner, spent a lot of money, invited friends, and he dares." "You invited your friends to show them off," I said, getting up too. "You invited me so you could show off your superiority." "Leonard!" Travis shouted sharply. "Apologize right now." "For what? For telling the truth?" Kimberly stood there, breathing heavily, her hands shaking. The guests looked on in horror, some of them starting to get up from the table, clearly looking for an excuse to leave. "You know what?" Kimberly said, trying to pull herself together. "Maybe I really should learn hospitality from your late wife. She's been dead for 2 years and you still can't get over it." "Kimberly!" Travis stood up so abruptly that he knocked over his chair. "How dare you?" "Why?" She turned to her husband. "I don't have the right to tell the truth?" "Your father is living in the past, constantly comparing everyone to his late wife, ruining every family event with his memories and claims." "Enough!" Travis shouted. "You're out of line." "Me? I'm out of line?" Kimberly laughed hysterically. "And what does he do? He comes into my house, eats my food, and then says I'm a bad hostess." "I didn't say you were a bad hostess," I said tiredly. "I said you're impolite." "It's the same thing," she shrieked. "In my house, it's the same thing." The guests were now openly about to leave. Madison had already grabbed her purse. Connor was helping her with her coat. The other couples exchanged quick glances, agreeing without words that it was time to flee. "Kim, honey," Haley said gently, "maybe we should—" "No," Kimberly said. "No one's going anywhere. I'm not going to let him ruin my night. I've been preparing for a week. I wanted everything to be perfect. And he—" She fell silent, looking at her beautiful turkey, which was still standing in the center of the table, untouched and cooling. Suddenly tears came to her eyes. "Look what he's done," she whispered. "I tried so hard. It was supposed to be beautiful." Travis came to her and tried to hug her, but she pushed him away. "Don't touch me," she said. "You didn't even stand up for your wife. You let him treat me like a servant." "It's not like that," Travis began. Shut up," she yelled. "Just shut up, you're weak. A mama's boy who can't protect his own wife from his toxic father." Now the guests were leaving without even trying to keep up appearances. They hurriedly said their goodbyes, thanked each other for the evening, promised to call tomorrow, but it was obvious that all they wanted was to get away from this family nightmare as soon as possible. Kimberly paced the dining room, sobbing and wailing about the ruined party, the wasted money, the fact that now everyone would think she was a bad hostess. Travis tried to calm her down, but every word he said only made her more hysterical. I stood by my chair and watched the scene with growing disgust. Not at Kimberly, at myself. I knew what I was getting into when I started this conversation. I knew she was unstable, that she took any criticism as a personal insult, but I couldn't help myself, couldn't keep silent when she started talking about Marguerite. And now I stood among the wreckage of the family holiday and realized that I had achieved only one thing: finally destroyed the already fragile relationship with my son. The last guest left. The front door slammed. It was just the three of us in the house, me, Travis, and a sobbing Kimberly, who was now sitting on the floor next to the table with her arms around her knees, rocking back and forth. "That's fine," she said through her tears. "A perfect Christmas. A perfect family dinner. Thank you both. Especially you, Leonard. You got what you wanted. You ruined my holiday like you ruin everything else you touch." Travis knelt beside his wife, stroking her back, whispering soothing words. But when he lifted his head and looked at me, there was cold fury in his eyes. "Are you satisfied?" he asked quietly. "Is this what you wanted?" I wanted to say that I hadn't started this war, that his wife had been storing up poison for months, that today she'd spewed it out. I wanted to tell him I was tired of being humiliated in my own family. I wanted to remind him of who we used to be before this woman came into our lives. But I looked at my son sitting on the floor next to his hysterical wife and realized that he had already made a choice a long time ago. And that choice was not in my favor. The tension in the house could have been cut with a knife. Kimberly continued to sob as she sat on the floor. Travis floundered between his wife and trying to fix the situation, and I stood by the table, feeling guilty for the chaos that had ensued. But it was too late to fix anything. The words had been said, the guests were gone, and the party was ruined. "Maybe I should leave," I said quietly, hoping that at least that would help calm things down. "No," Travis said sharply, getting up off the floor. "Don't you dare leave. We're adults. We can solve this problem in a civilized manner." "Kimberly, please get up off the floor. Let's talk calmly." Kimberly slowly got up, wiping her face with a tissue. Her makeup smeared, her carefully styled hair disheveled, her beautiful dress wrinkled. She looked like an actress after a difficult performance, tired, drained, but still ready for the next act. "Okay," she said, trying to pull herself together. "Good. Let's try to salvage what's left of the evening. After all, we are a family, and a family should be able to forgive." There was the strained determination of someone trying to convince herself of her own words. She walked over to the table and began to rearrange the plates, as if restoring order among the dishes would help restore order to the relationship. "The turkey's cold," she said bitterly. "I'll have to reheat it, although it won't be as juicy now." "But what can you do?" She picked up the turkey with both hands, intending to take it to the kitchen. I instinctively stepped forward, wanting to help. The dish was heavy and Kimberly was still shaking with nerves. But it was at that moment that something happened that completely ruined any attempt at reconciliation. I awkwardly reached for the salt shaker that stood next to the dish, intending to move it out of the way. My hands shook, whether from excitement or fatigue, or simply because age makes itself known at the most inopportune moments. The salt shaker tipped over, and its contents spilled out onto the golden turkey crust. Time seemed to stand still. White salt crystals slowly settled on the surface of the bird that had been Kimberly's pride a moment ago. The salt was embedded in the skin, ruining the appearance of the dish she'd been working on for 3 days. The tiny grains glistened in the chandelier light as a mockery of all her efforts. Kimberly froze with the dish in her hands, staring at the ruined turkey. Her face went through several stages, first shock, then incomprehension, then slowly building rage. She set the dish back on the table with such force that the porcelain tinkled. "What?" she started quietly. "What have you done?" "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "It was an accident. I just wanted to put the salt shaker away." "Accident?" Kimberly's voice rose an octave. "Accident? You ruined my turkey. Do you realize what you've done?" She grabbed a napkin and began furiously wiping the salt off the surface of the bird, but it was too late. The crystals had absorbed, leaving white spots on the brown crust. "Kimberly, calm down," Travis said as he approached her. "It's not that bad. You can just cut off the top layer." "It's not that bad?" She turned to her husband with crazy eyes. "Not that scary? Do you see what he did to my turkey? I cooked it for 3 days. 3 days. Marinating it, watching the temperature, timing it. And he... The words stuck in her throat. She grabbed the napkin again and began rubbing the turkey as furiously as if she could wipe away what had happened with the salt. "Kimberly, please," I tried to intervene. "Sona, I'll buy a new turkey. Or we can order a cooked one from the restaurant." "Shut up!" she yelled, turning to me. "Just shut up! You don't understand. It wasn't just a turkey. It was my holiday, my perfect Christmas dinner. And you ruined it. You always do." Her face contorted with rage. The glow of the candlelight danced in her eyes, turning them into the slits of a predator. She took a step in my direction, and I realized the situation was getting out of hand. "You know what?" she hissed. "You're doing this on purpose. From the very beginning, you've been trying to ruin everything. You can't stand to see your son happy. You're jealous of our family." "That's not true," I said. "I only want to—" "You only want to ruin my life," she shouted, waving her arms. "You're an old, lonely, unwanted man, and you can't stand the fact that we're young and successful." "Kimberly, stop it." Travis tried to stop her, but she was already out of control. "No, she wouldn't," she continued. "Let him hear the truth. Let him know what we think of him. You're a disgusting old man who clings to his son because no one else has one. Your wife is dead, and thank God she didn't have to see what you've become." After saying those words, something clicked in my head. I felt the blood rush to my face and my fists clench. Marguerite was a saint to me, and to hear this hysterical woman speak of her with joy. "Kimberly," I said quietly, but there was steel in my voice. "You're out of line." "Oh, you're crossing the line," she laughed hysterically. "I'm crossing the line. What are you doing? Coming into my house, spoiling my food, insulting me in front of my friends. I accidentally spilled salt." "Accidentally?" She came right up to me, her face a few inches away from mine. "Nothing is accidental. You're doing this on purpose. You hate me because I took your son from you." "You didn't," I said quietly. "You stole." The blow hit my left cheek so suddenly and hard that I staggered. The slap sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the dining room. Kimberly stood in front of me, breathing heavily, her hands still shaking with anger. "That's fine," she said, lowering her hand. "Now you've gotten what you deserve." I raised my hand to my cheek, feeling the burning sensation of the blow. Her fingerprints were clear on my skin. Travis stood a few feet away, watching the scene with his mouth open. I waited for him to say something, to react in some way to his wife hitting his father. But instead of outrage or trying to defend me, Travis suddenly laughed. Not angry, not hysterical, just laughed, the way you laugh at a good joke. "Well, Dad," he said when the laughter died down, "you really outdid yourself this time. Even Mom couldn't have ruined Christmas so spectacularly." Those words hit harder than a slap in the face. I looked at my son, the man I had raised, educated, loved unconditionally, and saw a stranger. There was no sympathy in his eyes, only irritation and fatigue. He was looking at me the way one looks at an annoying problem that one wants to get rid of as soon as possible. Travis, I started. No, Dad, he interrupted. Not this time. Kimberly's right. You came into our house, ruined our party, insulted my wife, and now you're trying to play the victim. He walked over to Kimberly and put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture of support in solidarity. They stood in front of me as one, husband and wife against an annoying relative. I think, Travis said, I think you should leave before this goes too far. As I stood in the center of their dining room, surrounded by the remains of a ruined dinner, I knew my son was right. I do need to leave, but not because I am to blame for what happened, but because there is nothing more to do here. I lost my son completely. Not today, not because of the salt, but long ago, gradually, piece by piece. All right, I said calmly. I'll leave. I went into the hallway to get my coat. Muffled voices could be heard behind me. Kimberly was saying something quickly to her husband. Travis was answering soothingly. They were already discussing how to clean up the aftermath of the family drama, how to get back to normal without me. Putting on my coat, I felt my cheek still burning from the blow. The mirror in the hallway showed the red stain on the left side of my face. The mark of the slap I'd been slapped by the woman my son hadn't even tried to stand up for. Dad, Travis appeared in the hallway as I was buttoning up. Look, maybe we should just cool off and talk tomorrow. His voice sounded uncertain, like he was saying words he thought he should but didn't feel. A formal attempt to smooth things over, dictated more by a sense of duty than a sincere desire to reconcile. Tomorrow? I asked again. What's going to change tomorrow, Travis? He didn't answer, and in his silence was the truth of our relationship. Tell Kimberly I apologize, I said, opening the door. And thanks for dinner. Dad, he tried again, but the words stuck in his throat. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The cold December air burned my hot face. It was quiet outside, with Christmas music playing somewhere in the distance. Probably the neighbors were having a holiday too, but a better one than ours. I walked to my car, got behind the wheel, and for a few minutes just sat there, staring at the lighted windows of the house that would never be home to me again. My son and his wife were still there, who were now probably clearing the remains of a ruined dinner off the table and discussing my behavior. Kimberly was probably already posting an edited version of events on social media where I would look like an inadequate old man who had ruined her perfect holiday. I started the engine and slowly pulled out of the driveway. The light from the kitchen window flashed in the rearview mirror. They must have already started cleaning up. Life goes on. The holiday can be saved if you just remove an extra element from it. And that extra element was me. The way home was through the old part of Rancho Cucamonga, where narrow streets meandered between houses built in the 50s. There were no wide avenues of the new neighborhood where Travis and Kimberly lived. No perfectly mowed lawns or houses that looked like the set of a movie about the American dream. These neighborhoods breathed history. Modest one-story buildings with porches, old oak trees that spread their branches over the asphalt, sparse streetlights that created cozy islands of light in the pre-Christmas darkness. I drove slowly, in no hurry to get home, where emptiness awaited me. The radio played old Christmas songs, the same tunes that Marguerite and I had danced to in the kitchen when Travis was little. Back then, Christmas meant the smell of cookies in the oven, garlands my son helped hang, long evenings playing board games. We didn't spend crazy money on fancy food and designer decorations, but we had something in the house that no amount of money could buy: warmth and sincerity. My cheek still hurt from the slap. I brought my hand up to my face, feeling the swelling where Kimberly's palm had left its mark. At 72, getting slapped by a 30-year-old woman was doubly humiliating. Not so much physically painful as mentally painful. But even more humiliating was the son's reaction. His laughter still rang in my ears like a slap delivered with words rather than a palm. I tried to understand when it all went wrong. When had my smart, kind boy turned into a man who could laugh at his own father's humiliation? Maybe it had happened gradually, imperceptibly. Like soil erosion, every barb from Kimberly washed away a bit of our closeness. Every remark about me, living in the past, distanced us from each other. Or maybe he'd always been like that, and I just didn't want to see it, preferring to see him as a reflection of my hopes rather than a real person with all his weaknesses. Margarita often said that parents see in children not what they are, but what they want to see. Her profession as a school psychologist taught her to distinguish between what she wanted and what was real, to realize that each child was a separate person, not a continuation of parental ambitions. Maybe Travis was weak-willed from the start, inclined to take the path of least resistance, and I'd convinced myself that it was softness and diplomacy, that he was just avoiding conflict like a smart person. But tonight I saw the truth. My son is a conformist who prefers to support the strong side, even if that side is wrong. He has chosen Kimberly not only as his wife, but as the leader in the relationship, has shifted decision-making responsibility to her, and is willing to defend her choices at all costs, even at the cost of her relationship with her father. The traffic light at the intersection of Haven Avenue and Archibald switched to red, and I stopped, watching the occasional car pass by. In one of them, a family was returning from some kind of holiday celebration. The kids huddled against the windows, looking at the Christmas decorations on the houses, the parents talking quietly in the front seats. A picture of family happiness that had once been my reality, but was now someone else's. The light turned green, and I continued down Archibald, heading toward my neighborhood. Here the houses stood farther apart. The lots were larger, and the trees were older. This neighborhood was built in the 70s for California's growing middle-class engineers, teachers, government workers, journalists like me. People who worked honest jobs, saved for a house, raised children with the hope that their lives would be better than their parents. Margaret and I bought our house in 1977 when Travis was 3. It seemed like a huge purchase at the time. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a garage, and a backyard for the kids to play in. We planned to live here all our lives, to meet old age surrounded by grandchildren, to pass the house on to the next generation. Now it's just a building where a lonely old man lives out his days surrounded by memories. I turned off the main road onto East Avenue, a small street leading to my neighborhood. It was quieter here, with fewer street lights and stretches of thick shadow between them. It was in one of these darkened areas that something happened that completely changed my evening. First, I saw the headlights, too bright and aimed in the wrong place. A car was traveling in the oncoming lane, wiggling from side to side as if the driver was struggling to steer. It was a dark sedan, probably a Honda or Toyota, but it was hard to make out details in the darkness. The car was moving too fast for the narrow street, and it was obvious something was going wrong. I instinctively slowed down and pulled over to the curb, giving way to the out-of-control car. At that moment, the sedan swerved to the left, crossed both lanes of traffic, and crashed with a terrifying thud into a massive oak tree growing on the corner of one of the lots. The sound of the impact was deafening. Metal crumpled, glass shattered, wood creaked under the impact of tons of iron. The front of the car crumpled like a tin can. The hood rose upward, covering the windshield. Steam came from under the hood, and a few seconds later I heard the hiss of escaping fluid. I stopped my car and jumped out, not thinking about my own safety. The training I had received years ago in a first aid course for journalists worked automatically. In our profession, we had to be the first on the scene of accidents, and the newsroom insisted that all employees know how to provide basic first aid to victims. Running up to the mangled car, I tried to get a glimpse of the interior. The driver's door was blocked, dented inward, but the side windows were intact. At the wheel sat a young woman, about 25 years old, unconscious. Her head was unnaturally thrown back. Blood was visible on her forehead. She was breathing, but it was shallow and uneven. "Miss!" I shouted, knocking on the glass. "Miss, can you hear me?" There was no response. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The metal had deformed so badly that it blocked the mechanism. So I went around the car, trying to find a way to get to the victim. The front passenger door was also blocked, but the rear left door opened, albeit with effort. I climbed into the passenger compartment and cautiously made my way to the driver's seat. The woman was unconscious but breathing. There were no other visible injuries on her face other than the abrasion on her forehead. But I realized there could be internal injuries, spinal or brain damage. It was dangerous to touch her, but I checked the pulse on her neck, faint but rhythmic. Pulling out my cell phone, I dialed 911. "Emergency services," the dispatcher's voice answered. Traffic accident on East Avenue between Archibald and Millow, I said quickly. The car hit a tree. The driver's unconscious, and we need an ambulance and fire department. What's your name, sir? Leonard Campbell. I'm with the victim. Do not move the victim, sir. Services are on their way. They'll be there in 5 to 7 minutes. I put the phone down and took another good look at the woman. She was dressed in an evening gown. Black, elegant, obviously expensive. A pearl necklace glistened around her neck, and she wore gold bracelets on her hands. She was coming back from some kind of party, just like me. Only her evening ended much worse than mine. Her purse was lying on the seat next to her, its contents spilling out. Lipstick, keys, a phone with a broken screen. There was an odor of alcohol in the air, but not a strong one. She'd probably had a couple glasses of wine at dinner at most. Perhaps the cause of the accident wasn't alcohol, but something else. A medical problem. Fatigue. Poor visibility. Steam continued to come from under the hood, but there were no signs of fire yet. I knew that modern cars are pretty safe in that regard, but I was still worried about the possibility of a fuel leak. I couldn't smell any gasoline, which was a good sign. Miss, I tried again. If you can hear me, don't try to move. Help is on the way. Her eyelids fluttered and she moaned softly. That was reassuring. It meant her brain was functioning, though not fully. I touched her hand gently, testing for a reaction. Her fingers tightened slightly in response to the touch. Sirens sounded in the distance, first one, then a second, then a third. The sound approached quickly, echoing off the houses of the sleeping neighborhood. Soon the chaos of the rescue operation would break into the quiet street. Flashers, radios, paramedic, and firefighter teams. I climbed out of the car and stood nearby to greet the emergency responders. In my coat pocket was my ID and business card, an old habit of a journalist to always carry an ID card. The police would be sure to ask questions, record witness statements. The first ambulance to arrive was a white van with red stripes, which stopped near the scene of the accident with a screech of tires. 2 paramedics jumped out, quickly assessed the situation, and began pulling equipment out of the vehicle. "Did you call it in?" asked the older man, a man in his 40s with graying whiskers. "Yes, Leonard Campbell. I was driving down the road and saw the accident. Driver's unconscious, breathing, pulse weak but rhythmic." "Okay, size. Step back, please. Let us work." The paramedics were coordinated and professional. One climbed into the passenger compartment with the victim. The other was preparing instruments. A minute later, a fire truck arrived, followed by a police patrol. The quiet street turned into a place of emergency operation, flooded with the light of spotlights and painted in red and blue colors of flashers. Firefighters began working on the locked door, using special tools to open cars. A police officer approached me with a notepad in hand. "Officer Rodriguez," he introduced himself. "Are you a witness to the accident?" "Yes, I was driving down East Avenue toward Millow and saw a car lose control." "Tell me in detail what you saw." I described the sedan swerving across the road, the driver apparently trying to control himself, the car crossing into the oncoming lane and hitting a tree. Rodriguez wrote down every word, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Did you notice anything unusual before the accident? Other cars that might have triggered the situation?" "No, the road was practically empty. The driver may have gotten impaired behind the wheel." Firefighters opened the driver's door with a metallic rattle. Paramedics immediately began extracting the victim, securing her on a special stretcher with neck and spine bracing. The woman was conscious but looked confused and frightened. "Where am I?" I heard her weak voice. "What happened?" "You've been in an accident, ma'am," the paramedic replied. "We're going to get you to the hospital now. You're going to be okay." The stretcher was loaded into the ambulance. One of the paramedics stayed with the victim, while the other approached the policeman. "Concussion, possible fractured ribs," he reported. "We're taking her to a regional hospital. The condition is stable, but requires examination." The ambulance sped away, leaving behind the fading howl of the siren. Firefighters continued to work on the vehicle, checking for fuel leaks or other hazards. A tow truck was on its way. "Mr. Campbell," Officer Rodriguez addressed me, "thank you for your help. If you need any additional statements, we'll be in touch. What's your contact info?" I gave him my phone number and address. Rodriguez wrote down the information and handed me back my driver's license. By the way, he added, we may have some reporters coming by. A serious accident on Christmas night is news. If you'd like to make a comment. I'm a journalist myself, I said. I was a journalist. I know how it works. Rodriguez nodded and went back to his car to fill out the report. I remained standing next to my car, watching the rescue services work. The adrenaline was slowly receding, giving way to fatigue and a strange sense of satisfaction. After a humiliating evening at my son's house, I was suddenly in a situation where I could help, where my actions mattered. The lights of a news helicopter from a local TV station appeared in the sky above the scene. That means the accident information has already hit the airwaves, and morning news viewers will know about the East Avenue incident. Perhaps one of my former co-workers is doing a live accident report right now. Half an hour after the ambulance took the victim away, reporters began arriving at the scene. The first to arrive was the van of local channel KKKS 7, a white car with brightly colored station logos and a satellite dish on the roof. It was followed by cars from other publications, a reporter from the San Bernardino Sun, a photographer from the Inland Valley Daily Bulletin, even a reporter from the Los Angeles Times, who was probably on duty in the area and decided to see if the incident was worth the big paper's attention. I watched them work with professional interest and a touch of nostalgia. Familiar bustle, familiar movements, the way journalists quickly assess the situation, the way photographers look for the best angle, the way cameramen deploy equipment. All this was once part of my life, my daily routine. How many times I myself came to the scene of accidents, interviewed witnesses, recorded police statements. The cops were used to the media attention by now and dealt with reporters in a professional but discreet manner. Officer Rodriguez gave standard comments about the time of the accident, the condition of the victim, and possible causes of the accident. Firefighters were demonstrating the process of evacuating the vehicle, and tow truck operators were preparing to remove the mangled car. A young reporter from KDKKS 7, a skinny guy of about 25 with carefully styled hair and an expensive suit, approached each of the people present, trying to find an interesting angle for his story. An ordinary accident on Christmas night wasn't a sensation, but it was still news for local television, especially if you could find a human story behind the dry facts of a police report. "Excuse me," he turned to me. "Are you a witness to the accident? Could I ask you a few questions for the news story?" I hesitated for a second. Part of me wanted to just go home, to end this hard day alone. But the other part, the professional, journalistic part, understood the importance of testimony to complete the picture. Plus, after a humiliating evening at my son's house, the opportunity to feel useful, important, was appealing. "Yes," I replied. "I saw the accident." The cameraman quickly set up the camera, pointing a bright light at us. The reporter turned on the microphone and began the standard procedure of recording the interview. "My name is Brad Harrison, KKKS Channel 7. With us is Leonard. I'm sorry, what's your last name?" "Campbell. Leonard Campbell." "Mr. Campbell, can you tell us what you saw tonight?" I described the events the same way I told the police officer, how I drove down East Avenue, how I noticed the out-of-control car, how the collision with the tree occurred. Harrison asked standard questions that would help viewers visualize the accident. "What do you think may have caused the loss of control?" and he asked. "It's hard to say definitively," I answered cautiously. "Perhaps the driver felt ill at the wheel, or it may have been a reaction to some obstacle I didn't see. The police will conduct a full investigation." "Did you assist the victim before the emergency services arrived?" I checked her condition, made sure she was breathing, and called for help. The general rule in these situations is not to move the victim unnecessarily to avoid aggravating possible spinal injuries. Harrison raised an eyebrow, interested in my knowledge of medical procedures. "Do you have a medical degree?" "No, but I worked as a journalist for 40 years. I had to be on the scene of various accidents, learn the basics of first aid, a professional necessity." "A journalist?" Harrison seemed interested. "What publication?" "Rancho Cucamonga Observer. Covered local news, city councils, school districts. Retired 3 years ago." Suddenly, the expression on the young reporter's face changed. He looked at me intently, as if trying to remember something. "Leonard Campbell of the Observer?" he asked again. "Wait a minute, You wrote a series of articles about corruption in the school district in 2015 and the piece on the water supply problems on the east side of town? I nodded, surprised that my young colleague remembered my work. Yes, those were my materials. Wow, Harrison exclaimed, turning to the cameraman. Keep filming, it's interesting. He turned to me again. Mr. Campbell, I studied your articles in a journalism course at the university. Professor Johnson often cited them as examples of quality local journalism. I was particularly impressed with the story about school board members embezzling funds intended for school repairs. I felt an unexpected warmth from those words. After an evening of being treated like a decrepit old man, it was nice to hear that my work hadn't been forgotten, that it mattered. Thank you, I said. It was an important story. Children were learning in classrooms with leaky roofs, and money was being spent on the personal needs of officials. And your investigation led to the resignation of 3 council members and the recovery of stolen funds, Harrison continued. We were taught at university that this is a classic example of how local journalism can make a difference. Harrison's colleague, a seasoned cameraman in his 50s, who appeared to have worked in news for decades, pulled up next to us. Len Campbell? He asked. From the Observer? Damn it, Brad, do you know who you're talking to? This man is a legend in local journalism. Len, remember the cannery fire in '87? You were the first one to get there and shoot exclusive footage. I remember, I smiled. There were no cell phones back then, and I had to look for a payphone to dictate information to the editorial office. Exactly, laughed the operator. And the story about that criminal mastermind who tried to buy up land for a shopping center through frontmen? You were threatened, but you didn't back down. Harrison listened to this conversation with growing enthusiasm. I could see the idea of a more interesting plot than the usual traffic accident forming in his mind. Mr. Campbell, he said, what if we did a more extensive interview? Not just about today's accident, but about your career and how journalism has changed over the years. Our viewers would be interested to hear the opinion of a seasoned professional, I wondered. On the one hand, the attention was flattering, especially after Kimberly regularly let me know I was an outmoded anachronism. On the other hand, I was tired, frustrated by the events of the evening, and I wasn't sure I was ready for a serious conversation in front of the camera. I don't know, I said. Today had been a hard day. I understand, Harrison nodded. But you know, stories like this are important. Young journalists need to know about the people who laid the foundation of the profession in our region. And viewers like to learn about people who did important work in the shadows. Meanwhile, the cameraman kept filming, capturing our conversation and the general atmosphere of the scene. The flashing lights of police cars, a tow truck lifting a mangled car, firefighters wrapping up equipment all came into the frame. It all provided a dramatic backdrop for our conversation. Okay, I finally agreed. But let's finish with the main topic first, the accident. People need to know the facts about what happened. Of course, Harrison agreed. So, Mr. Campbell, how would you rate the performance of the emergency services tonight? Professional and quick, I replied. The ambulance arrived 5 minutes after the call, the fire department and the police almost simultaneously. The paramedics acted competently and extracted the victim with the utmost care. This is how emergency services should work. And what would you advise drivers, especially during the holidays? Be careful on the road. If you feel sick, it's better to stop and call a cab or have someone pick you up. No event is worth risking your life, yours or others. Harrison nodded and signaled the cameraman to continue filming. Mr. Campbell, you mentioned your journalism career. 40 years in the profession is an impressive length of time. How did you get into journalism? After the Army, I went to California State University, San Bernardino, and studied journalism and political science. I got my first job at a small newspaper in Pomona, then moved to the Rancho Cucamonga Observer when the city was just starting to grow. It was a time of great change in the region. Tell us about some of the most significant stories you've had the opportunity to cover. I thought about the decades of work, the hundreds of articles, the people whose stories I've told readers. It's hard to pick the most important ones, I said. Maybe a series of stories about how developers tried to skirt environmental regulations when building a new neighborhood. Or an investigation into how city officials inflated contract prices and took kickbacks. But you know, sometimes the most important stories were simple human stories. about families who lost their homes to flooding, about veterans who lacked medical care, about children with disabilities who needed community support. How has journalism changed over the years? Technically, dramatically. When I started, we used typewriters, photos were developed in a dark room, and materials were submitted on paper. The internet has changed everything. The way we gather information, the way we distribute news, and the way we relate to our audience. But the basics remain the same. Fact-checking, seeking the truth, telling stories that matter to people. What are your biggest concerns about journalism today? I was silent for a moment, pondering my answer. It was a complex question that touched not only professional, but also personal feelings. Speed, I finally said. Everyone wants news immediately, right now. This pressure leads to journalists sometimes publishing insufficiently verified information. And I'm also worried that local journalism is in crisis. Newspapers are closing, editorial offices are being downsized, and it is the local press that controls the work of city councils, school districts, and local officials. Without that control, democracy at the local level weakens. Harrison listened intently, nodding occasionally. I could see that he was genuinely interested in the topic, not just practicing an assignment. What advice would you give to young journalists? Don't forget that behind every news story there are people, I said. Your job is not just to convey information, but to do it honestly and with an understanding of how your words will affect someone's life. And remember, in the age of social media and blogging, professional journalism is needed even more than before. Someone has to fact-check, someone has to ask uncomfortable questions, someone has to tell stories that those in power would rather keep quiet. The tow truck had already loaded the mangled car onto the platform and was preparing to leave. The police were finalizing paperwork and the fire department was gathering equipment. The scene was slowly taking on a normal appearance, save for a damaged tree and oil stains on the pavement. "Mr. Campbell," Harrison said, "thank you for the interview. It was an honor to talk to you. When the story comes out, I'll be sure to send you the link." "Thank you," I replied, "and good luck with your career. Remember, good journalism never goes out of style." We shook hands and the crew began to pack up the equipment. Other journalists were also finishing their work. Photographers took the necessary pictures. Correspondents recorded the comments of officials. I remained standing near my car, watching the departure of the last participants of this little drama. Just an hour ago, the place was bustling with activity, emergency services working, cameras flashing. Now East Avenue was once again in its pre-Christmas silence. Suddenly, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in months. Talking to the young journalist reminded me of who I was, that my work mattered. After an evening of humiliation at my son's house, this interview was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that I wasn't just a pesky old man living in memories. Getting in the car, I turned on the radio. The same Christmas music was playing, but now it didn't seem so sad. The drive home no longer seemed like an escape from trouble. It was a way to relax after a day that ended, if not well, at least meaningfully. By the time I reached home, it was about 11 o'clock in the evening. The house greeted me with its usual silence. No one was in the hallway to ask how the day had gone. No one was waiting to tell me about the family dinner. I hung my coat in the closet, took off my shoes, and made my way to the kitchen to make tea. The usual ritual of ending the day, which helped to calm down and put my thoughts in order. Sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming cup in my hands, I reflected on what had happened. The day had started with gift shopping and hopes for at least a tolerable family celebration, and ended with a slap in the face from my sister-in-law and an interview at the scene of a traffic accident. Life tends to throw surprises when you least expect them. My cheek still hurt where Kimberly had hit me. I went to the hallway mirror and examined the mark a red spot with clear fingerprints that would turn into a bruise tomorrow. At 72, getting slapped by a woman half his age was humiliating, but not as painful as the indifference of a son who not only didn't stand up for his father, but laughed at what was happening. The phone rang about 12:30. Travis' number popped up on the display. "Dad?" His son's voice sounded unsure. "Did you get home okay?" "Yeah, thanks. I'm fine. Listen, about what happened. Kimberly's really worried. She didn't mean to hit you, it's just, she was really upset about the turkey." I kept quiet, waiting to see what else my son would say. Maybe an apology, maybe an admission that the situation was out of control on both sides. Maybe tomorrow you could call her and apologize, Travis continued. She's been preparing for this dinner for a week, and it ended up being so unpleasant. I have to apologize, or I asked quietly. Yeah, you ruined her turkey. And then those words about mom. It was cruel, Dad. I realized the conversation had reached a dead end. Travis didn't see anything inappropriate in his wife's behavior, but he demanded that I apologize for accidentally spilling the salt and for daring to defend my mother's memory. Good night, Travis, I said, and hung up. Sleep didn't come right away. I lay in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the wind in the branches of the old maple tree outside the window. Once Marguerite had been lying next to me, and we talked about the past day, planned tomorrow's activities, shared thoughts about Travis and his future. Now the other half of the bed had been empty for 2 years, and there was no one to talk to. I woke up early, around 7 in the morning. It was sunny outside, one of those clear winter days that Southern California was famous for. I brewed some coffee, toasted some toast, and turned on the morning news, as I had done every morning for years. The host of Good Morning Inland Empire, an attractive middle-aged woman named Lorraine Parker, was talking about the plans for Christmas celebrations in various cities in the region. Then she switched to a rundown of the night's incidents. Now for a traffic accident in Rancho Cucamonga, she said. A car crashed into a tree on East Avenue late last night. The driver was hospitalized with a concussion and broken ribs and is in stable condition. Our correspondent Brad Harrison is on the scene. The screen switched back to the footage from the day before. I saw a familiar place, a damaged tree, flashing lights of emergency vehicles, a tow truck with a mangled car. And then there I was, answering a young reporter's questions. I looked tired, but I was clear and to the point. Harrison edited the material professionally, including my basic comments about the accident and the work of the rescue services. And then came the part of the interview where I talked about my journalistic career. We have with us accident witness Leonard Campbell, Harrison's voiceover said, a veteran local journalist who spent 40 years with the Rancho Cucamonga Observer newspaper. Mr. Campbell not only helped the victim, but also shared his thoughts on how journalism has changed over the decades. I was on camera talking about the importance of fact-checking, the role of the local press in a democratic society, and advice for young journalists. Harrison also included a comment from his cameraman about my past investigations. The story lasted about 4 minutes, quite long for the morning news, so the editors deemed the story worthy of an extended feed. When the story ended, the camera went back to the anchor woman in the studio. Interesting story, said Lorraine Parker. It's nice to know that someone with that kind of experience was there for you in an emergency. And now, the phone rang just then. An unfamiliar number popped up on the display. Mr. Campbell? A woman's voice sounded agitated. This is Sarah Mitchell, producer of Good Morning Inland Empire. We just aired a segment featuring you. Yeah, I saw it. Lorraine is very interested in your story. We'd like to bring you in for a live interview on our morning program. Tonight, if that's possible. We have a segment called Heroes of Our Community, and your story is a perfect fit. I hesitated. On the one hand, the attention was flattering. On the other, I wasn't sure I was ready to go live, especially after yesterday's events. Will it take a long time? And I asked. About 15 minutes, no more. We can pick you up in an hour and bring you to the studio. Or if you want, we can broadcast from your home. Better in the studio, I decided. He'll be here in an hour. Great. The car will be at your place at 9 in the morning. I showered, shaved, put on my best suit, the dark blue one I bought for special occasions. I examined my face in front of the mirror. The slap marks were clearly visible, but not critical. I could have tried to disguise them, but I decided to leave them as they were. The truth is the truth. The car from the TV station arrived exactly at 9 o'clock. The driver, a young guy in a uniform with the channel's logo, was polite and talkative. On the way, he told me that he had been working for KKES-7 for 2 years and that he liked to drive interesting people to programs. The channel's studio was in a modern building in the San Bernardino business district. I had been there a few times for work, but always as an interviewing journalist. Now the roles were reversed. I was a guest, the object of attention, not the source of it. In the dressing room, a makeup artist, a girl with brightly colored tattoos on her arms, was professionally applying light makeup for television to my face. "Oh, you have a bruise on your cheek," she said. "Would you like me to cover it up?" "No need," I replied. "Let it stay that way." She shrugged and went on with her work. The producer, Sarah Mitchell, was an energetic woman in her 40s who quickly explained to me the format of the interview. "Lorraine will start with questions about yesterday's accident, then move on to your career," she said. "Nothing complicated, just relax and answer naturally. The program is recorded, but we try to make it as live as possible." I was escorted into the studio, a brightly colored room with several cameras, lighting equipment, and comfortable chairs with the city skyline as a backdrop. Lorraine Parker greeted me with a friendly smile and a firm handshake. "Mr. Campbell, thank you for agreeing to come," she said. "Your story last night was a real gift to our program. Are you ready?" "Ready," I replied, sitting down in the chair across from the host. The technicians checked the sound. The cameraman set up the cameras. A few minutes later, the command "Begin" sounded, and the studio plunged into the working atmosphere of live broadcasting. "Leonard Campbell is in the studio with us," Lorraine began, looking directly into the camera. "He witnessed a serious traffic accident in Rancho Cucamonga last night and helped the victim before paramedics arrived. But that's only part of his story. Mr. Campbell is a veteran journalist with 40 years of experience in the local press." She turned to me. "Leonard, tell our viewers what happened last night." I repeated the story of the accident, how I helped the victim, how emergency responders worked. Lorraine asked good questions to help uncover the details of the accident. "What were you doing in the neighborhood so late that night?" she asked. "Heading home from a family Christmas dinner," I replied. "How was your holiday?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected the conversation to go that way. Lorraine looked at me with the professional interest of a presenter who senses that there might be a more interesting story behind the usual answer. "Not very good, to be honest," I said, not thinking about the implications of my words. "What happened?" Lorraine leaned forward, her journalistic instincts catching the possibility of human drama. I could have evaded the question, said something general about family disagreements, but something inside me, the same honesty that has compelled me to tell the truth in articles all my life, wouldn't let me lie. "My sister-in-law slapped me," I said calmly, "for accidentally sprinkling salt on her Christmas turkey." There was silence in the studio. The cameraman moved the camera closer to get a better view of my face. Lorraine blinked several times, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "A slap?" she asked again. "Ah, yes." I turned my head so the camera could get a better view of the mark on my cheek. "Here are the marks." And my son, instead of standing up for his father, laughed and said it was my fault. Lorraine was an experienced presenter and quickly realized that she got an exclusive material, a live human drama, which is much more interesting than the usual road accident. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said softly. And I did. About the tense atmosphere at the table, about Kimberly's barbs at me, about the way she'd humiliated me in front of the guests, about the accidental salt spill and the explosion of rage that followed, the slap and my son's laughter, about leaving a home where I no longer felt welcome. "Why did you decide to tell it on live TV?" Lorraine asked. "Because it's true," I replied. "For 40 years I've been writing the truth about other people. Why should I lie about my own life?" "What's your sister-in-law's name?" "Kimberly Campbell. She's married to my son Travis. They live in Rancho Cucamonga on Eastridge Drive. I gave you the whole address." The studio became so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. "Mr. Campbell," Lorraine said cautiously, "do you realize that this is television? That thousands of people are watching us?" "I do," I replied. "So what? If a man hit a 72-year-old man at a family party, why should it be kept secret? Does domestic violence become acceptable if the victim is an elderly man and the aggressor is a young woman?" Lorraine glanced over to the producer, who was standing behind the camera making some signs. It was obvious that the program was completely out of its planned direction. "Mr. Campbell," she said, "perhaps we should see a marriage counselor, try to resolve the conflict peacefully." "Conflict?" I smiled bitterly. "It's not conflict, it's one-sided aggression, and my son chose the side of the aggressor. What kind of psychologist would help in such a situation? The producer made more and more energetic gestures, and I realized that my time on the air was coming to an end. What do you plan to do next? Lorraine asked quickly. Move on, I answered, without illusions about what kind of son I have and what kind of family I have. Last night I lost people close to me, but I gained honesty. That's not a bad trade-off for a man my age. The car from the TV station brought me home by 11:30 in the morning. The driver was unusually silent compared to the trip to the studio. Evidently, the news of what had happened on the air had already reached all the employees of the channel. I had no doubt that in a few hours the interview would appear on the internet and start spreading on social networks. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the house, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar to me, but I answered it. Mr. Campbell, an excited female voice. This is Jennifer Rose from TMZ. We'd like your comment on the interview you gave this morning. I hung up before I finished. TMZ is serious. So my family drama had gone beyond local TV and gotten the attention of the national tabloids. 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was Travis. Dad! I could hear the panicked tone in his son's voice. What have you done? I got calls from coworkers, neighbors. Kimberly's crying. You told our family on TV. I told the truth, I replied calmly. Isn't that what you should have learned from your journalist father? What truth? You made a fool out of us. Kimberly is named, our address is given. We've got reporters standing under our house. I went to the window and looked outside. There was an unfamiliar car outside my house too, with a man who was clearly filming something on his phone. Travis, I said, what's most upsetting to you? That your wife hit an elderly man, or that others found out? She didn't mean to hit you, he shouted. It was an accident, an emotion, and you turned it into a circus. An accident? I laughed. Your hand accidentally went up and accidentally struck? And your laughter afterward was an accident too. I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing from nerves, from the situation becoming absurd. I see. And to protect your father from an aggressive wife, you also did not allow nerves? There was silence in the phone. Then I heard Kimberly sobbing in the background. Look, Dad, Travis' voice became pleading. Can you give me a rebuttal? Say it was a joke, a misunderstanding? Kimberly's threatening to get fired from her job. They say a scandalous reputation will hurt the company's image. So? I asked. Is that my problem? You're my father. You have a family to think about. What family, Travis? The one that kicked me out of the house on Christmas Day? The one where the daughter-in-law can hit the father-in-law with impunity and the son laughs about it? We didn't kick you out. You left. After a slap, which you didn't condemn. Travis was silent for a few seconds, then spoke more softly. Okay, she was wrong to slap you, but you were wrong about your mom too. I was defending your mother's memory from your wife's insults, I interrupted. If you can't see the difference between defense and offense, then I've raised you very badly. The phone went silent again. Then I heard Travis talking to Kimberly in a muffled voice. Dad, he said finally, Kimberly wants to talk to you. Tell Kimberly that if she comes near my house, I'll call the police, I said. I have the videotape of the TV interview as proof that she's prone to manhandling. You can't do this to us, Kimberly's voice broke through the tube. You ruined our lives. I ruined your life? I interjected. Interesting logic. You're the one who hit me, and it's my fault. We're a family, she shouted. Family problems are not publicized. It's basic decency. Kimberly, I said very calmly, I've been a journalist for 40 years. I've seen hundreds of domestic violence cases. And you know what the aggressors always say? Exactly what you're saying now. It's a family matter, don't make a big deal out of it. But when a 72-year-old man gets slapped and his own son laughs about it, that family doesn't deserve to be protected. You disgusting old man, Kimberly yelled. We don't want to know you anymore. You're dead to us. Fine, I replied. Then you have nothing to worry about. The dead don't give interviews. I hung up and turned off the phone. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window. On the threshold stood a young woman with a dictaphone in her hand, next to a photographer with a professional camera. I didn't open the door. Instead, I wrote a note. Leonard Campbell has no further comment. Everything I had to say was said in this morning's interview on KKKS7 and taped it to the door on the inside so that it would be visible through the glass insert. I spent the next few hours at home, not going out or answering the phone. The landline phone rang every 10 to 15 minutes. Journalists, bloggers, even some TV show producers. I turned it off too. By late afternoon, the activity outside had subsided. The reporters apparently realized they weren't going to get any additional commentary and left to find other news. I turned on the TV to watch the evening news. My story was all over the local newscasts. Some channels simply recounted the gist of the interview, while others accompanied the story with comments from family psychologists about intergenerational issues. One station even sent a reporter to Travis and Kimberly's house, but they refused to comment. The next morning, I turned on my computer and looked at what was happening on the internet. The video of my interview had already racked up several thousand views on YouTube. The comments were divided roughly in half. Some supported me, calling me a courageous man who was not afraid to tell the truth, while others criticized me for taking my family problems public. The topic of domestic violence against the elderly was particularly hotly debated. Several elderly rights organizations had already expressed their support, and a local radio station invited me to participate in a discussion on the topic. But I was more interested not in the public reaction, but in my own feelings. For the first time in the 2 years since Marguerite's death, I felt free. There was no need to pretend to be a loving father and grandfather, to put up with humiliation for the sake of preserving the family appearance, to tolerate the barbs of my daughter-in-law and the indifference of my son. The truth proved liberating, as truth should be. 40 years of journalism have taught me that lies require constant effort to maintain, while the truth holds up on its own. In the evening, the landline rang. I had forgotten to turn it off. The number was local, unfamiliar. Mr. Campbell, an elderly male voice. My name is Robert Young. I saw your interview on TV. I'm listening. I'm also a retired journalist, worked at the Los Angeles Times for 30 years. I just wanted to say I respect your courage. Not everyone dares to tell the truth when it involves family. Thank you, I replied, suddenly moved. I have a similar situation with my daughter and son-in-law, Young continued. Only I've been silent for 5 years, pretending that everything is normal. After your interview, I thought, maybe stop pretending. Everyone decides for himself, I said, but pretending takes a lot of energy. Yes, it does. I'd like to meet you sometime, to talk. There is a club of veteran journalists in the city. We meet once a month. Why don't you join us? I wrote down Young's phone number and the club's address. After talking to him, I felt something akin to hope. So there are people who realize that the truth is more important than a family world built on lies and silence. The next week, the calls were fewer. The media interest waned. The story of the 72-year-old journalist slapped by his sister-in-law gave way to more recent scandals and incidents. But for me, this week changed a lot of things. Travis didn't call anymore. Kimberly didn't either. Apparently, they decided that the "you're dead to us" threat should be carried out literally. It didn't upset me. On the contrary, I was relieved to no longer have to maintain a relationship that had only caused pain. On Friday of that week, I went to a meeting of the Journalism Veterans Club for the first time in 2 years. There were about 20 of us gathered, older men and women who had dedicated their lives to finding and reporting facts. We talked about how the profession had changed, shared memories of important stories, and discussed contemporary media issues. Len, said Robert Young after the formal part, you have shown us all that honesty has no statute of limitations. It's sometimes harder to tell the truth at 72 than it is at 30. Just tired of lying, I replied, and I realized that I had nothing to lose. There's a lot to lose, Young said. Self-respect, for instance. As I drove home that night, I thought about how life goes on even when it feels like it's over. I had lost my son and daughter-in-law, but gained something more precious, the right to be myself, to say what I think and not apologize for the truth. There was a silence waiting for me at home, but it no longer seemed oppressive. It was the silence of a man who had said what he wanted to say and didn't regret it.